sustenance and support from Haiti, something he conveniently forgot in his hour of triumph. And in the midst of all the repression and bigotry, we need to remember how those of African descent gave their all to the extent allowed. In world wars, this obviously applies not only to the United States, but also Europe, where African participation in World War was extraordinary, but where the resistance under de Gaulle in the 20th century, like Bolivar in the 19th, was saved by African troops prior to the whitening process, the replacement of Africans with Europeans in the winter of 1944-45, following the defeat of the Germans in Normandy, when only white troops participated in the triumphal return to Paris. This is not a matter of political correctness, but rather one of accuracy of telling the truth, and it is arguably a part of African history, as well as others. As we speak in the immediate domestic context, there is added urgency to the need to reposition itself in relation to the dominant narrative, as we have entered a period in which the West's wrestling with the consequences of empire has reached the defining moment, in which former subjects are striving to move to the other side of the ledger for full inclusion as citizens and compatriots, or to create a new ledger. But this is taking place concomitantly with the anxieties of a largely white working class who have experienced the diminution of their circumstances in the face of globalization's withering force. The expression of these anxieties has an unmistakable quality of xenophobia, sexism, misogyny, and racism. In a context of shrinking resources and opportunities, the question of who should benefit turns on the familiar insider-outsider dichotomy. Who is a citizen? Who is a foreigner? And the demand for state protection against quote-unquote outsiders. Africans and their descendants are included in the crosshairs. Now, more than ever, she must engage the question: how might I participate in the debates and struggles over the meaning of citizenship, with charges of illegals and terrorism flying in every direction, such that a conjoined agenda of social justice and equity is advanced? African immigration in Europe is a clearly related critical theater. The context of a rapidly aging Europe, whose quote-unquote natural population increase is unable to keep pace with its labor needs, has done little to retard the rise of xenophobia there, with its virulent hostility to Africans, who in the tens of thousands have sought entry through the Canaries, through Malta, through Greece, through Italy, by way of long, harrowing passages, often ending in the deaths of those huddled and stowed away in the dangerous vessels, unworthy of seafaring, like some modern version of the Middle Passage. Those who survive are treated with utmost contempt, harassed, hounded, detained, deported. You see them in the thoroughfares of Paris, Rome, Athens, eking out a living in the streets, staying one step ahead of the authorities. African women are trafficked throughout Europe in the thousands. In Italy alone, at one point, there were more than 10, it may have increased since the time that I saw this figure, there were more than 10,000 West African women purportedly working as prostitutes, out of some 30,000 immigrant African women in total, often victims of arrangements between organizations and families who may not have known that, their daughters were bound for sex work as opposed for other opportunities. And then there are the challenges in the African continent itself. Here I will tread very gingerly. Rather than engage with specifics, which usually issues into highly contentious debate, I have learned my lesson. Allow me to instead wonder aloud if we are experiencing a crisis of expectation. What do we really expect for the continent? We certainly applaud successes here and hope for and struggle for meaningful change there. But what do we really expect? What do we really anticipate? The scholar of Africa lives in this very real world, and wittingly or not, participates in these discussions. We should not be naive that socially and politically inflected perspectives and values find expression in peer-reviewed articles and tomes ostensibly only concerned with much earlier periods of African history. Thank you very much. Do I have to take questions?
I'm afraid so. We have plenty of time, unfortunately.
Okay.
So I will open up the floor and invite you to offer comments, questions, critiques, anything goes.
Yes.
I'm trying to think how to phrase this without sounding as terrible as it sounds.
That's terribly what?
As it's gonna come out.
Okay.
I'm trying to
Yes.
as you spoke, when we talk about, immigration issues, let's say today, did you state or imply a type of immigration with the transatlantic slave trade, like a forced immigration of the people? Because I've heard that term from, not you, but in other places. But is that really how how should historians define immigrant? Or is that changing to try and accommodate, to not really let people understand that wasn't really like, yay, let's go to the Americas, the Caribbean, and South America. It was forced. So how do you address that? Or is that?
Well, if you heard me render it in that fashion, that's not what I meant. I'm not one who employs that kind of terminology. I think that our colleague Inikori may have written a book that has some terminology in it, something like that. And I certainly understand what he meant. But that is to say, he was simply trying to draw a contrast between the fact that the transatlantic trade was, was an exercise in coercion as opposed to other forms of immigration. So I certainly agree with your observation. Yes. So does that get at what you're asking?
Yes, because it didn't seem that that's what you meant, but some people can interpret that because that's, especially with today, politically, it could be like, oh, well, this historian said it's immigration, right? That really wasn't quite like the voluntary leave.
Well, I think that, no, obviously that wasn't the case. But I do think that you're pinpointing that issue indeed segues to, this other matter that I was trying to get at, and that is that, so this is a, so one of the interests in which I have is trying to bridge this, trying to discuss global Africa, if you would. And I think it's very, very important. I think it's extremely important because, and in my approach to the notion of a global Africa or diasporic Africa, it is by no means confined to the Atlantic. Okay, the Atlantic is but one sector, and we have all of these other communities in other parts of the world who are either clearly of African descent or probably of African descent or are Africans, but tend to be marginalized or ignored in the scholarship or not recognized. And I think that it's very important to really encourage this kind of work. Over at NYU, I'm beginning to encourage and actually beginning to get students from the Central Islamic lands who are able to, really work on these kinds of issues from a